Hi, this is Magda from the Wnętrza Zewnętrzne channel and welcome to another renovation episode. This time I'll tell you about the walls and a little disaster we experienced. In the previous episode I told you to keep your fingers crossed that the next stage would be laying the tiles. And as you can see, it has arrived. We're actually starting to lay the tiles. Here we already have with the cross spacer. Here we already have the wall by the toilet prepared, so we can install the toilet here as soon as possible. The waterproofing is already done here. The purple one is for the shower walls. And soon there will be tiles everywhere here, so I'm super excited. But before I tell you about the tiles, I'd like to talk about the walls, since that's what we worked on earlier. And there's also a pretty stressful story connected to one of the walls, but let's go step by step. First of all, we have the walls finished in 4 different ways here. We have exposed brick, we have plaster on the wall with the window. We have a partition wall made of drywall on aluminum profiles, which is filled with mineral wool. So this is a typical drywall partition wall. And we also have drywall attached to the exterior walls of the apartment. Not the exterior walls of the building, just the apartment's outer walls, the wall with the entrance door and the ones on either side, drywall panels. This is one of the most popular solutions during renovations nowadays. And on one hand, I kind of understand this phenomenon, because you get such a smooth, even wall, you just bring in the panel, attach it to the wall, and it's done. However, I still don't understand, because honestly the feel of drywall walls is really questionable. Maybe in everyday life you actually don't notice it that much, you just don't pay attention to it. But for me, I can feel it, and look, for example, when I knock here. Do you hear how hollow it sounds? I don't know if the microphone will pick it up well, but I'm sure you've already come across this in everyday life. That sound of a hollow wall, so empty inside, for me it's really unpleasant. However, in this spot, the panels weren't mounted on aluminum framing. They were just glued with blobs of drywall adhesive. So in some places where that adhesive is, the wall doesn't sound hollow. Here it sounds hollow. Here it doesn't sound hollow. So if this glue was everywhere, it would be perfect. But unfortunately, it's a bit heavy. And lifting a drywall panel with this glue is generally a difficult thing. You could supposedly put the glue on the wall first, and then stick the panel to it. That would probably work too. And maybe then you could use more of it. But the glue also comes in bags with that powder, which you have to bring here, and mix it with water. And those bags are heavy too. And here, on 2 walls in this spot, let's say approximately 2 by 2, and the same amount in the bathroom. So there were about 12, maybe 20, I don't remember anymore, but it wasn't just 2, it was a lot. We carried quite a few in here. I carried them in here myself, and the electrician was surprised that I did it alone. He joked that since I do things like that, he has to be careful around me. So it's just something that's noticeable, and people who have already experienced it know that it's just heavy. And this apartment isn't on the 4th floor, so imagine carrying bags for all the walls in the apartment up to the 4th floor without an elevator. And I understand that I'm not one of the strongest people, but it's generally exhausting, I think, for everyone. It's just that some people get tired faster, others later, but in general everyone gets tired. So when you can carry metal studs which are lighter, they're long and awkward, but they're light. Well, it's definitely more pleasant. What's more, installing drywall with glue is also difficult because the board bends. So it might happen that you press it in more in some places and less in others, and the wall will end up crooked. So you have to keep running around with a level, trying to tap it in. If you tap it in too much, you have to tap it somewhere else so it sticks out there instead. Or just pry it up with something and even it out. The glue has to be applied evenly. If the walls are uneven, you have to use more. Where there's a bigger gap, use more and less where the wall sticks out more so you get a properly plumb finish. So that it doesn't happen that when we push the wardrobe in, there's, a 10 cm gap somewhere. That's why it's not as simple as it might seem at first. And in this respect, aluminum profiles win again, because you can take your time. Each one is mounted separately. You align it vertically. And then you just screw the board on. And it's even because each profile is properly adjusted. What's more, there are even simpler solutions. There are these discs, well, maybe that's not the right word, these plastic wheels with a screw that you screw into the wall. And you can set that disc at different angles. And you can just adjust the whole surface. And then you screw things onto those round discs. Whether it's the floor drywall walls or the ceiling, it's also convenient. And the discs are even easier to transport than the profiles. They will fit in the car, unlike the profiles. So as you can see, these solutions related to screwing in drywall. And as a result, they're simply the easiest to make. But this effect is much nicer. How do you find the balance? I don't know yet. Nevertheless, I'm definitely in favor of that quieter sound, because I can't stand that echo. It just makes me cringe. It makes me cringe. And now, for comparison, the sounds of the partition wall. Here we have an empty one, here with glue. So that's the quietest one. And here is the wall. It's also kind of muffled, but it has lower tones than here. Right? So here the wool is already doing its job, but still it's not quite satisfying for me yet, like here, where it's quiet, because there's glue and there's no empty space behind the drywall. And I told you why screwing in drywall is the simplest method. But I should actually say why it's considered the simplest method. That's the thing. That in my case, it's not exactly like that. Because drywall panels are quite heavy. You have to carry them in. They're huge. Look, this one is 2.4 meters tall. I can't even reach the top. Here it's 1.2 meters wide. It weighs about the same as a bag, but it's definitely less handy. Well, I think that one panel weighs around 20 kilograms, so you can still manage to grab it and lift it and move it, but carrying it up the stairs where the ceiling height changes. And you have to maneuver that board gently. Well, that's already hard, because you can't even look around. You can't see anything behind that board. So from my perspective, this is something that can only be carried by 2 people. And I know there are craftsmen who carry it by themselves. I admire that. But there's something I just can't get around. And the truth is, even people bigger than me often carry it in pairs. Because carrying it is one thing, but you have to do it carefully. If you touch a wall with a board like that while carrying it, it just, bam, it gets chipped. It's already crumbling, already damaged. Then you have to, fix it, more work. It doesn't make sense. It's definitely better to carry it together, if that's possible. But life doesn't always work out that way. You're not always with a bigger group. Still, because these boards are so awkward to carry. That's just how it is in its own way. It's also hard work. And to be honest, personally, I definitely prefer plastering. Even though it's a bit of dirty work, you get messier, and it's more like sculpting. So you need to have a bit more feel for it and trust your intuition a little and your skills. And still, it might not turn out well if you don't have good experience, despite everything. Plastering is the most accessible for me, because carrying a bag, even a 20 kilogram one, I can manage. Even though it weighs like a board, it's more convenient to handle. And if I get tired and even drop it somewhere along the way, nothing will happen to it. But if I bang up the board, well, it'll get damaged. So definitely the bag is much better. And then Laying it down also doesn't require that much strength all the time because you just spread the compound. But with drywall panels, you still have to set up those drywall panels, you have to maneuver them, and there really is a lot of it. And when it comes to screwing them in, that's not so bad. Although sometimes some of those screws are just that they're hard to screw in. With a screwdriver, when you're screwing into those door profiles, which are really hard, you also have to use a lot of force for that, so that the screw can go through. So it's a power tool, and it's supposed to be easier, but power tools are designed in such a way that sometimes they still require strength. And that's just how it is. Well, it's unfortunate from my perspective. From the perspective of a person who wants to do something but doesn't have much strength. And when gluing, it's even worse because the glue makes the board even heavier. You have to hammer it in. You have to hit the board so that the glue spreads out a bit to the sides. You need to press the board in to make sure it's vertical. And honestly, sometimes I just didn't have the strength anymore. I didn't have the strength to hit it. So it's good that there were two of us. We could take turns. And sometimes one person felt like those verticals were just too much for her. They start swimming before your eyes. You can't tell what's straight anymore, and that's when someone else steps in. And she makes some adjustments. You can complement each other. But if I had to do it alone, it would be a disaster. I have no idea. If I were able to do it all by myself, I mean, even lifting that board with glue, because just the board alone is easy, but with glue, if you don't grab it evenly from both sides, it will break under the weight. So really, I think that renovations are a team effort. But because of that, I feel like I just have weak spots in those areas, which limit my independence and my contribution. But when it comes to plastering, I don't notice those gaps as much. And that's why I like plastering the most. Now we're in the kitchen. In the place where I'm standing, there will probably be a cooktop, because here's the outlet for the range hood. But it's possible the cooktop will be here, and here will be the countertop. So, hello from the countertop, the future one. And behind me there is a brick wall. And that's it. On one hand, it's a nice decoration, which also emphasizes the atmosphere of the place we're in. It highlights the history of this building. It looks nice, interesting, cozy, nice color. And sometimes it's the simplest solution. Of course, cleaning brick can also be a lot of hassle, because you have to clean it. Get rid of the old plaster, the dust, make it look good. Some people even fill in the joints with brick, with some new filler to make it look cleaner. Here we're going to leave it as it is, unfortunately at the very top. There are some holes, and it's not that we cleaned too much, there were just some gaps there, less densely. I think they laid it that way with the bricks, that mortar. So you can judge it in different ways, but we plan to leave it like that. You know, the work is dusty, you clean it with a brush. You can use a wire one. With a drill it gets even dustier. You can do it by hand. Then there's a bit less dust. It falls down more than to the sides. But you have more control. You do it with more precision. Maybe it takes a bit longer. Different people have different preferences, but you don't have to carry it in. No drywall. You don't have to carry in any bags. You don't have to bring in any glue. No bags of plaster. You don't have to. No, you don't need anything. Maybe it will be primed, impregnated, and that's it. So it's a brick, not just decoration. From my perspective, it's definitely a more pleasant job too, simply. I can't say it's the fastest job, because not necessarily. But it's the most suited to my abilities, because I'm patient. I handle working in dust well, and well, I'm not very strong. And here you don't have to lift any heavy things. As for this wall, at first we didn't want to remove the plaster from it at all, because it had this really thin, hard layer, really nothing but hard. Naprawdę nieźle się trzymał. And the less work, the better. You know, a simple wall. Why make more work for yourself? Especially since there are two windows here, so doing anything isn't such a simple thing. But when the cables were being laid and there were various holes drilled in this wall because of that, I noticed that this plaster tends to crack a bit where those holes are. And once it cracks, it can easily come off in whole sheets, and that worried me. Well, it was to be expected, because that's generally how it is with old walls and old plaster. So the safest thing to do when renovating an old apartment in an older building or a house is just to remove all the plaster and put it on again. But you know, we were hoping that there would be a bit less work for us. But in the end, we decided it's better to remove it while everything is still dirty. This is already our second change of mind when it comes to the wall in this apartment. This one was initially meant to keep the plaster, but it can't be helped now. You have to come around to certain decisions, and once we removed it, we had to put something on. And as usual, when people hear that we have a brick wall that needs something put on it, they immediately suggest drywall. And not even gluing it, but just putting up the framing and it's done. I can't stand this approach. Especially since you can't fill this wall with mineral wool on the exterior wall, for example, so it doesn't sound so hollow. Because doing insulation from the inside on an exterior wall affects how moisture passes through the walls, and it can lead to mold appearing. Sometimes it doesn't happen, but it can. It's a certain risk. It is definitely not recommended to insulate from the inside with materials like mineral wool or styrofoam, so that's out of the question. So, since plasterboard panels are not an option when it comes to walls, then you could have glued them. But that's also a difficult job from my perspective. And the third option is plaster, and that's the most legit option in my eyes. Plasters are nice, the wall feels like a wall, nothing echoes. Nice. It's just that the external wall is exposed to temperature differences and humidity differences. It's the most delicate one, right? Like inside between the rooms we can do whatever we want, that's fine. But the external wall carries risks of mold, mildew and moisture coming through. You have to handle it more carefully. And because of that, it's often recommended to use traditional proper plasters like lime or lime cement plasters because they have good vapor permeability. In addition, these plasters are also quite hard so they don't chip off, especially here by the window. Well, it's obvious that this wall is exposed to various kinds of physical impact, if I can put it that way. So I really wanted to put this kind of plaster on. I thought one wall would be just right to learn, because they say that these traditional plasters are difficult. Well, yes, first of all, it involves several stages and each one has to dry, so it takes at least a few days. And secondly, these different mixes behave differently. An experienced craftsman knows how to mix it so that everything turns out just right. A less experienced craftsman can buy a ready-made mix at the store and hope that it works. And generally it should be possible to get it done somehow. The thing is, we were pressed for time because out of the blue the phone rang and the central heating team said they'd be coming after the weekend. So we had 2 days to prepare this wall to have the plaster done, because if they put the radiators on the bare brick, how are we supposed to plaster under the pipes later? That would be a total nightmare. Smoothing maybe you could manage, but plastering? No, that's too thick of a layer, it's just too difficult. So we had to prepare this wall before the team arrived. So we dropped everything we were doing before. Previously the bathroom was the priority there. And we stopped working on it. We focused on that wall. The plaster was stripped, the primer was applied. And now I think we should do a rough coat. I mean, I don't remember the name, but it's a special plaster mix, just a bit more watery in a way. With good adhesion, which you throw onto the wall so that little particles just stick, creating a very uneven surface. And then when you apply the actual plaster, it sticks well to the wall because the wall is really rough and uneven. And it holds on nicely. I mean, it's not just about the unevenness, it's also about the composition of the mixture. Nevertheless, that's how you prepare it, and between these stages, you know, sometimes you even wait 24 hours. So we couldn't do it over the weekend, but I really wanted to. This plaster, which will be, you know, vapor permeable, traditional, without gypsum, so that this wall would be like it was in the old days and durable, and so that no mold would appear here. Another thing is that there's no problem with moisture here. This apartment stood empty for over a dozen years and there was no mold or fungus. The tenement building is generally connected to district heating, so it's warm here, the apartments are well heated, and my concerns were a bit exaggerated, but I wanted to try anyway. So we decided to try a shortcut and skip the stage with the rough coat, or whatever it was called. We'll just choose a primer that has some quartz elements in it and increases adhesion, and maybe we'll be able to apply the plaster directly onto that primer. So we prepared the wall. It's Saturday evening, the primer has dried well, and we start applying the plaster to the wall, but it just slides off like a pillow. It doesn't stick at all, it just falls off. And I felt hopeless because we had already lost so much time. The whole Saturday was gone and it was a disaster. And we should have expected it, but somehow I felt that what we were doing would be enough, that it just couldn't be that hard. Why? And yet, it was difficult. Not in terms of any technical issues, but rather because you have to do it properly according to the instructions, especially when you're doing something for the first time and you don't know much about it. And here it is, Saturday evening, and now what? We already know that things are bad, there's no point in thinking about it. The question is, what next? You always have to focus on finding a solution, not dramatizing. Especially if all the stores are about to close, and they'll be closed on Sunday. So we dropped what we were doing here, got in the car, and went to the store, this time a different one. And there were two options. We can buy a different plaster and see if it sticks, but if it turns out it doesn't, we won't have time to buy anything else. So we can buy both a different cement lime plaster and a gypsum plaster, which we know will hold. And if the first one doesn't work, then we'll use the second one. And as for the rest of the first one, because you know, you buy a lot of bags, we'll just return the rest of the first one to the store after the weekend. Well, that scenario was pretty good, but it meant we'd have to move a lot of bags, and we weren't really looking forward to that. Fortunately, when we got to the store, the dilemma was resolved because it turned out they didn't have any lime cement plasters. The man said they probably haven't sold them for about 5 years now. And that's a big surprise for me because I see that traditional plasters have really been replaced by gypsum plasters. I understand why that is, because gypsum plasters are actually easier to work with and faster, and as we know, time is money, especially during renovations. But on the other hand, maybe it's a bit of a shame, because those lime cement or even pure lime plasters also have their advantages. But I think that maybe in regular stores, the people who work with plasters just don't buy them. In stores, it's people who are still beginners like me who buy them. And if someone is a professional plasterer and specializes in it, maybe they use some other wholesalers where they have special conditions. Or maybe they mix the plasters themselves instead of buying ready-made mixes. It's probably cheaper for them that way, and they get it just the way they want, just the way they like. They know what they're doing, so it's likely the best solution. Still, it was a surprise for me because I've heard a lot about lime plasters or lime cement plasters, and they're nowhere to be found here. It turns out that it's a product from a previous era, and nowadays it's not really available anymore. That surprised me a bit. But because of that, our dilemma about what to buy was solved, and we just bought gypsum plaster, which we already had experience with, so we knew it holds up nicely and is easy to apply. And that would be the positive note of the story, but in reality it wasn't so positive because we were running out of time. This is a whole big wall, not just patching up a single hole. There are also windows here, and by the windows, oh my, how can I put this to convey the drama without using any inappropriate terms? There is a lot of intricate work, and because of that it's hard to focus on anything specific. For example, when you're working on a large surface, you can focus on making it a nice even surface. Here, you can't just focus on making an even surface, because you have to constantly watch this side to make sure everything makes sense. Here, so the brick wall stays clean since there won't be plaster. Here, so you don't accumulate too much plaster, because it will overflow and drip on the corner, so that the corner itself has some shape. Yeah, there are a lot of different things you have to take into account. Here it's also hard to even things out at the edges, especially under the windowsill. The wall is so crooked it's unbelievable. How do you keep it vertical at the same time, right? Yeah, because when you're just smoothing the wall, you're only making it even, but when you're applying plaster, you really have to make sure it's vertical. Later on, after some time, you can smooth out the plaster a bit with sponges. Also the thickness of the wall here and there to make sure we're not accidentally going off at an angle. A lot of variables. And there are also tools that help with this. There are these strips that you embed in the wall. Use them for vertical alignment, then level the wall to the strip. From my perspective, it's more work than it's worth. It's definitely easier, at least on a wall that's as complicated as one with windows, to rely a bit on your intuition and feel for it. And just like someone who, I don't know, feels confident driving a car and might get annoyed by those beeping car warnings about, I don't know, a car in another lane. About you braking hard. If you feel confident driving, you know you're braking hard because someone in front of you braked. And you don't need another device going beep, 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 beep to warn you because you know what's going on, right? And it's similar with doing things like that. If you feel it, if you see it, it's easier without those little strips, at least here. Maybe on a big wall it would work better, because then you set those strips farther apart, you take a bigger trowel, and you can just smooth it out nicely, pressing against those strips. But here, well, not really. So, as you can see, the value of different things, their usefulness, usually depends on the circumstances above all. Nevertheless, the wall got done. We worked really hard on it because we wanted to finish it as quickly as possible, so that it could dry a bit, so we would still have time for any possible corrections and could show the crew where everything is, where there are cables inside and where the pipes should go, so that it would actually be done the way we want, because we couldn't be there on the day the crew was supposed to install it. And imagine we come back to Warsaw and we're exhausted. After a super intense weekend of preparing the wall for the central heating crew. Then the crew lets us know that, well, actually they can't make it this week, that they'll install it later instead. And on one hand, that's great because we'll have time to put on the finishing coats here, maybe even paint, so the radiators will go in nice and clean. But on the other hand, well, we would have focused on the bathroom, which is a more urgent matter to finish because it would be easier for us to do various jobs here. Once we have access to the toilet and easier access to water, so we can wash our hands and fill things up. Because even though we have faucets, it's obvious that they're not as comfortable as a regular bathroom. Well, that's life. The wall is finished, and we probably did it faster than we would have if we weren't in such a hurry. Along the way, we also had an adventure with cement lime plaster, which definitely teaches you humility. And in the future, we'll be more careful. Still, I haven't been discouraged from using lime or cement lime plaster. I'm still very eager to learn how to apply it, but maybe this time calmly, properly, and not in a rush using some shortcut that doesn't work. That's all for this episode. Let me know in the comments if you also have similar feelings about those empty walls made of drywall and that hollow sound when you tap on such a wall. Maybe it's completely neutral for you, or maybe you don't like it either. I'm curious about your impressions. And now I'll say goodbye to you. I encourage you to subscribe to the channel and see you next time. Bye.